Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, We Don't Know What We Don't Know. My name's Frida Koch, and I'll be one of your hosts today. But before we get into introductions, we want to take just a quick minute to jump over to the safe harbor slide in case there's any forward-looking statements that are made during the webinar today. But we have a lot to cover today, so let's go ahead and get into the introductions now. Again, like I said, my name's Frida Koch. I've been in the ServiceNow ecosystem since around 2007 when I was a customer. And I was actually in charge of resetting ServiceNow at our environment because we kind of had a botched implementation. And I'm happy to say that customer is still using ServiceNow. But in 2009, I joined ServiceNow as an engagement manager and spent about 10 years out in the field with customers like yourselves, implementing ServiceNow in your environments. And then I came to some internal roles, most recently this role as a senior marketing manager, where I concentrate on providing content to help customers onboard and adopt our products. And I'm here today, not only because of my experience, but also because I'm really passionate about customers and making you successful. And also at the approximately 150 kickoffs that I did with customers, almost every time one of them came up to me and said, "You have to tell us, we don't know what we don't know." And with that, I'll turn it over to our next presenter.
Hi everyone, my name is Earl Duque. I actually am I'm out of the three of us, I'm the newest person at ServiceNow, but that also means that I'm the most recently with customers. My background was originally in student affairs and contract management, but then I learned ServiceNow as a facilities worker working for EMF in 2017, and then transitioned into a sysadmin role, and then climbed that developer ladder and became a senior developer and engineer lead within the University of California. And I ended in UC San Diego before joining ServiceNow as a developer advocate. And I'm now currently a senior developer advocate with ServiceNow. But the things that drive me, the things that I'm passionate about, student developers, community programs. I host a lot of the community developer programs, and anything hacking related, like hackathons, and we're running Hacktoberfest right now for our developers, just all the fun stuff for our developer program. And I'll kick it over to Andrew.
Well, thanks, Earl. Happy day, everybody. I'm Andrew Barnes. I have a long career in working in the enterprise application space. So I worked in higher ed for about 20 years, teaching computer science and running enterprise application systems, which is how I got involved in ServiceNow area. We decided to, bring ServiceNow on, and that was back in 2014. And since then, I've been a platform owner at a couple of customers. I was at an implementation partner for a while, and I've been here at ServiceNow for 5 years. My last role was actually the same role as Earl has. So I was a developer advocate in our developer relations team. And now I'm a product success director, and I work with our largest customers, helping them understand how to use all of the platform products that they're licensed for. And so I focus in on things like citizen dev programs, distributive dev programs, managing your ServiceNow development at scale. And those things are super excited to me, and I'm delighted to be here with you today.
Right. Thanks, Andrew. Because we like to try to keep these sessions a little bit interactive as much as we can, being a webinar, we've got a poll question for you here. So how confident do you feel that your ServiceNow journey is following best practice and standards? Weigh in, please. We have, looks like somewhat confident is sort of leading the way at the moment, but it's confidence pretty close. We'll let that run for a little bit longer to make sure everybody has a chance to put in their answer there. And our goal with this webinar is, by the end, hoping that you'll feel confident that you know how to follow best practices, even if you aren't necessarily, perhaps. All right. It looks like we got about 64% of people responding. So I'm going to go ahead here. Whoops, we still got a couple more coming in. I don't want to cut you off, but...
Actually, I have a question for Earl. Earl, yeah? What's your answer to this question when you were at a customer?
When I was at a customer as a developer, probably when I first started, I was not confident at all, and that's the honest truth. And then eventually, as I started interacting more with the resources that were all over the place and finding things on the community that got better, but a lot of it was just finding time to talk to people that have done it before. And then I became more confident over time, which is why we have this session. So
Thanks for
Exactly.
sharing.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll here so we can keep moving. Next up, before we get into the actual content, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our live events. We have a QR code here that you can scan, or you can go to the community to find the Live on ServiceNow under the Events tab. You don't want to miss out on our other webinars. We have other webinars in this welcome series that include deeper dive topics such as customization versus configuration that we did last month, and more to come on citizen development and other topics that we hope are top of mind for you. So we want to make sure you know about that. And then also just want to make a plug here right now. We will be doing a survey at the end of the event. And we really appreciate it if you take a couple minutes to fill that out, because that helps us make sure that our webinars are hitting the mark, our content is good, our format is good, etc. So please take a few minutes to give us some feedback. We really appreciate that. And now I'm going to hand it back to Earl, who's going to give us an outline of where we're going today.
awesome. Thanks, Brita. So today's goal is pretty straightforward. It's to get enough general topics into your minds with like first thoughts and first steps for each of them. A common thing that you're going to be seeing throughout these slides will be the idea that for every hour that you're putting in work right now, early on to your journey in ServiceNow, it'll save you weeks of work later. Like I said, I've been with multiple customers, so I know that journey, and I know that there's so many times where I look back and I'm like, oh, I wish we did this a lot earlier and we would have saved so much more time. And we're going to be covering a lot of those things today at a very rapid pace because it's a lot of topics. But remember, we are only trying to get these topic conversations started so that when you go back to your teams, you could start following the breadcrumb trails that we're going to be setting up for you that you might not have known about at all. And you can follow those to your heart's content. This isn't prescriptive guidance. This is just starters. We have a recap slide at the end for you to take home in case you want to have an easy way to screenshot something so you can take to your team later. But we want you to focus on paying attention to the conversation so that you can kind of gather in the kind of things that we're going to be talking about. And so let's jump right in. We have a lot of things to talk about. We'll have Andrew start off with his first topic.
Oh, thank you, Earl. I get to go first. It's exciting, and this journey is exciting. So the first topic is about that. We're talking about the new ServiceNow instance, getting a new ServiceNow instance. So you've got a brand new ServiceNow instance and database, and what kind of opportunity that is for you. So the first thing that you could do is make it exactly like your old tool. So ServiceNow is a development platform, and you can change it nearly any way you want. But we want to encourage you to think about it in a different way. So what you've received in that new ServiceNow instance is a whole suite of software products. And those products reflect the processes that they're trying to build towards. And they have been built and curated over time to showcase the leading practices for those processes that's reflected in those products. And that's an opportunity for you to take a step back from what you're currently doing and evaluate the new process and products versus what you already have. So this is an opportunity for you to compare and contrast and figure out how to best leverage this new product and product suites in this new database within your organization. So we like to think of it as start with that, assume that what's built in ServiceNow already that's provided for you is a good starting point. And so don't try and change everything all at once. The other thing to think about is these software aren't built in isolation. So when you have one of these product suites like ITSM has got incident and problem and change, And those products in this brand new instance that you've got that are following the leading practices for those product areas and processes, they are built in ServiceNow to take advantage of the best ways that ServiceNow works and to work with each other. So they aren't built in isolation. There's coordination between those. And so you want to, when you're looking at your processes and how to fit into ServiceNow, take that into account, that you have the opportunity to make those changes and optimize your processes and take the best advantage of ServiceNow's best capabilities in that new opportunity space. So with that, I'm going to hand it over back to Earl.
And before we move on to the next one, I just want
yes.
to point. I just want to point out that if you ever are going through ServiceNow, any one of the products, and you're wondering, I wonder why they set it up this way. One of the things that I thought was cute when I first started was that I noticed that one of the base roles was ITIL for all the users. And that's kind of like an indication that, hey, a lot of these things that were set up in ServiceNow, they set up according to what was the current standards, according to ITIL, according to what best practices were. So if you ever run into that, like, well, ServiceNow is set up in a different way than we were doing it before, well, that's a good point. That's a good starting point to ask, oh, I wonder why. So that's a fun thing that I noticed when I was a customer too.
Excellent point.
And thank you, Andrew, for handing it off to me. Mine's similar. So the data itself. So you are moving from one system to another, and that's a huge data migration for a lot of people. And I've been through database migrations within ServiceNow, with outside of ServiceNow in past jobs and everything. And one of the things that I know about ServiceNow was the best practice that I learned when I was learning about migrating data in ServiceNow was similar to how I migrated data in other systems. And a lot of that falls along the idea of essential data only. So it's actually standard practice to avoid migrating all your old data. And you're going to have a lot of people that are going to be saying, we need to have all this data because we have that data and it's important and we move it forward. But there's a reason you're moving systems. There's a reason why you're starting fresh. You're recreating your processes and streamlining things. And so it's actually standard to not bring everything over and only bring over what you need. In fact, it's not in my speaker notes, but one of the things that we always joke about is show me the person that is actually going to be wanting to look at all that old data. And if you can find them and they can give a good justification of why they need that data, then maybe have that conversation. But a lot of people will realize we don't need all that new data in our new system. And so moving forward, just know that moving all that data is time consuming and it's often unnecessary. Moving all that data will trap you in your old processes. It's the idea that if you are trying to move all that old data, that means you have to find a place for all that new data in the new system in ServiceNow. And you're going to have to make processes around all that old data on processes to accommodate all that old data and reporting and analytics, all the different stuff that is a part of that. So as you're thinking about your previous, on the previous slide that Andrew was talking about being in a new system and streamlining, think about what's the important stuff to move forward and only aim for that stuff. We have a blog by Mary Venata, one of our data experts, about customer onboarding and how to handle big data and stuff like that. And that link is in the chat, and it'll also be in the resources slide at the end of this presentation. But it's something to think about. Only move the right data over. It's such a headache to deal with data that no one uses, but we have to keep maintaining, even though nobody's actually doing anything with it. And I know that from experience. So just consider that as you start beginning moving that data over. And then
and it gets confusing too when you have all that data, or some people will be like, oh, we're going to go back and clean it up and rationalize it later. And we all know that never happens, right? End up with gigabytes, terabytes, whatever bytes of storage.
Yeah. That's exactly right. All right, yeah. And I'll hand it over to Brita next.
Yeah, thanks, Earl. So I'm going to talk a little bit about iterative implementation methodology or thought process. Obviously, this is near and dear to my heart as a former project manager. And so one of the things that I would find with a lot of customers, particularly in the beginning, we were new, we were in the cloud, and Agile wasn't as well known. A lot of people kind of push back on the Agile approach or were kind of afraid of it. But what we found over time is that the Agile approach is really perfect for ServiceNow because our platform is so easy to customize and configure that you can get results really quickly. And so you can have some quick wins by converting, some spreadsheet into ServiceNow to something that's easier to use, or an email process, something like that. And then you have these quick wins, and there's a lot of advantages to quick wins. You keep your project team motivated because when you're doing the big bang approach and you don't turn on all the bells and whistles to the very end, sometimes you really feel like you're slogging through day to day. And is this really going to work? Whereas the iterative implementation kind of keeps everybody motivated. And the other thing about it is you're going to have detractors, right? You're moving to a new platform. There's always somebody that's like, you're going to take X out of my cold, stiff hands. And by showing some wins to these detractors, oftentimes you can turn them into champions. And those detractors will become your most ardent champions for your platform. So that's another great reason or output that I've seen of using the iterative approach. And it also allows you to adjust quickly to when changes occur. Any of you who have run software implementation projects or any projects, a change, something's going to happen. You're going to have to swerve somewhere in the project. Somebody leaves the team, you get new leadership, the date moves, your company gets bought, whatever. There's a lot of things that can happen. And when you're taking an iterative approach, it's easier to adjust to those changes because you're not as locked into a pathway. Now, I'm not saying you don't need to have a project plan. We kind of call it Wagile. Some people call it Scrum Fall. You want to have a project plan that has your major milestones, your key steps that you need to accomplish. But what I've seen a lot of customers get really down into the weeds about work breakdown structures and dependencies, and they want to have everything all mapped out. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing necessarily, but most of that is going to change throughout the project, and you can get mired down in all that planning and never get off the ground. And that's another reason why the iterative approach is really helpful. We have some tools to help you with that as well. So we have our Now Create tool that has process guides in there to help you understand how the platform works. They have templates in there, and there's success packs that help you navigate an implementation. So we do try to provide some tools to support you on your Agile, Wagile, iterative implementation. And also check out my blogs on the new customer onboarding site in the community, as Earl alluded to the one interview I did with Mary Bonata. I have some other blogs out there about how to get started with projects, planning, resources, et cetera, and that sort of thing. So that's my spiel on iterative implementation. And so I'll throw it over to Andrew.
Well, thank you for that. And when you're doing that iterative implementation, one thing to think about is, yes, we are all humans, but when you're thinking about designing processes and how people are going to use your products and interact with your system, an important step to do that constantly needs to be reminded to yourself is that think about this and how the end user is going to experience it. So have that human-centric approach to how your end users are going to interact with your system and optimize for them. Because the better that you craft this process and products towards reaching those users in the way that they want to be interacted with, the better the overall adoption and interactions and happiness with your system will be. So, when you're adopting a big new software suite or something large like a new platform like ServiceNow, you're going to have folks that are going to be resistant to change because change is going to happen. But one of the things that I'll suggest and will suggest is that you think about those users, but don't just think about them in isolation. Actually tell them that you're thinking about them. Let them know. Do outreach to your users. Have, user groups established to collect feedback, and let them know that you're thinking about them, and let them know how you're trying to meet them where they're at, because that will open up the opportunity for them to be more accepting. And some of them will even become like champions for change for your process and product. And when you're doing those organizational change management activities, like you will be in a big project like bringing on something like ServiceNow, you need those change champions out in the field. And so communicate with those users that you are thinking about them, collect their feedback, let them know that since we're doing an iterative approach, we won't be able to necessarily do everything that they gave us feedback on immediately, because we need to, release things over time and do that continuous improvement over time. But if you over communicate and let them know that you're thinking about them, and then actually think about them and take their feedback and incorporate that into your plans and roadmaps, you'll have a much happier community space, and adoption will be easier, and you'll have an easier time getting future changes in, because they know that you're looking out for them. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Britta.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And to add on to that, one of the reasons I had to reset ServiceNow at my previous employer was because they didn't take the human-centric approach. They had the manager of the networks run the program. So, he had the EQ of a snail and, did not interact with people. And, he just designed the system without talking to the users or the stakeholders. And that's why it didn't go well. So I can't emphasize that enough, which also leads into my topic of building the right team. And where I start with building the right team is right at the top with your executive sponsor. I've seen projects try to run without one, and it doesn't go well, because you're going to need that executive sponsor, because they help you if you need more budget, if you have a change to the timeline. If there's two people that are at a peer level that can't come to a decision, you need somebody at a higher level to be a decision maker so your project can move along. Without the executive sponsor championing this through the organization, you're going to struggle. And that has to be an active, involved, and strong person to lead this, to help you get through the implementation. The next thing I'd emphasize is the right people for the right roles. So what I saw happen fairly often, and maybe Earl and Andrew, you saw this too in projects you were on, they'll go, look, oh, well, Andrew isn't that busy, we'll make him the project manager, but Andrew doesn't have project management skills. And maybe another company will say, oh, well, we'll get Earl to do it. I mean, he's an incident process manager, but he's a great project manager. He can just do this on the side. That doesn't work either. Because either the first scenario, you have the person who doesn't have the right skills, and in the second scenario, you have the person who doesn't have the right time. What you need is ability and availability with the people that you put in these roles. Without the two of those combined, somebody like an Earl who gets tapped to be a project manager will be really burned out by the end of the project, or maybe even before the end of the project, which you don't want. And the Andrew persona, maybe he doesn't have the abilities to run a project or those skill sets. But if you really want to use him, then make sure he gets training, so he's just not thrown to the wind to try to be in a role that he's not prepared for. He could still be successful, but he needs that training, which gets down to training, which I can't overemphasize, but investing in your people as well as in the platform. Because if you put all your investment into the platform and think it's just going to run by itself, that's not going to happen. You have to invest in the people to get them the right training. And again, if you throw somebody into developing in ServiceNow, maybe they're a great developer in another platform, but they don't know our platform. They don't know our table structure. They don't know our taxonomy. They need that training before they get in there, because if they don't, you're going to have them doing rework, or you're going to get somewhere down the line and you're like, oh, if I had known this, I wouldn't have done it this way. So avoid that, because to Earl's point at the very beginning of our session, we're trying to help you know what the gotchas are, the things you need to know about. Well, you spend that extra hour of time, I use that in air quotes, so you save hours of time later. So that's my preaching about building the right team, which I'm really passionate about. And I'll turn it over to Earl next, who's going to talk about governance, which is pretty closely related to this topic, actually.
I feel like these three slides have been our 1, 2, 3 punch for it. So the idea of being human centric, building the right team, and now governance, they all kind of feed into each other in a way, because just as Brita was talking about, you have to make sure you're picking the right people for the right roles and right for your team to build on these things. And you can find those people. You just have to focus on humans. You have to and start governance early, which is what I'll talk about right now. Because in my experience, whenever we had good governance across our ServiceNow instances, that revealed across our organization who would be the right people for our roles, because we brought people to the table basically. And so governance is this idea that you are setting up proper roles and inputs and feedback and vision across everybody that would be potentially using ServiceNow. And my background is in higher ed. So if anybody else is a higher ed in watching our webinar right now, you'll know that it's not just a ServiceNow instance with a single organization like your IT organization. No, I've been in a ServiceNow instance where we had 22 autonomous organizations all operating within our instance. They were all tenants within our instance, all with their own organization, all with their own hierarchy with who reports to who, and we all were in the same instance. And so governance was very important. And if you begin governance practices early, it makes for much smoother transitions later. One of the very important things to do with governance is establish a communication strategy very early, both for intake, so things like feedback mechanisms, and for outtake. So whenever, what Andrew mentioned earlier, like communicating to your people about releases, about new changes, about those kind of things, having a communication strategy established early and everybody knows what that strategy is, it benefits everybody. The idea of setting up change management early on so that we know who to communicate with whom whenever something changes, and that we know when things are being done within it, and being able to say what that management is within side of our governance structure. But one thing that I know a lot of people don't remember to do when they start establishing governance early is this idea of finding a vision and purpose. So if you can clearly articulate the purpose of your ServiceNow software and of your platform, and how the governance will ensure its optimal and strategic use, you will basically be setting the foundation for all subsequent decisions. So establishing that kind of vision together as a instance, as all the people that might be tenants within your instance, is very helpful, because when different, especially when in my experience with higher ed, when one org wants to do something in a certain way and this org would do it another way, we would basically look at that vision and purpose and say, well, which way fits that more, and we can make decisions based off of that. Within the governance, make sure you establish all the roles and responsibilities clearly. Who are considered your system administrators? Who are your tenants? Who are your tenant administrators? What do you consider end users? Who are your stakeholders? Who are your decision makers? Make sure you specify the respective duties and rights concerning ServiceNow, and establish it for each organization that's inside your governance, so that one thing that always helped us was we knew if we needed to have a question for this tenant within our organization within ServiceNow, we go to this person to ask them, and they figure out who to talk to within their group. It just makes it a lot more easy to communicate too. We do have a section with it about governance within our customer success center, and we'll provide that link too in the chat and in our resource notes too. So that's a lot about governance. Higher ed is filled with it, so I have a lot of love and pain from establishing governance throughout, but it's really important to get done early because it really helps with that decision making down the line.
It's not one of those superstar areas where you get a lot of accolades and people are like, yay, Earl did governance.
Yeah.
But it's really important because without it, things don't go well sometimes.
Sorry,
Yeah, and so one extra thing I'll add on the governance topic is it's not static. So none of these things are static. So make sure that you build into your governance process that checking it, making sure that it's working and serving its need and adjusting it as you need. And talking about adjusting and moving forward, driving desired behaviors is the next topic, which is preparing for the future. So when you are crafting something like a platform like ServiceNow and bringing it in, you're going to want to adjust things over time. You're going to want to drive continuous improvement throughout the life and use of these products on a platform. And in order to do that, the best way is to have data to help you drive decisions and drive the behaviors that you want currently. So establishing what you're measuring against, and what your goals are important steps for any process. So in the context of ServiceNow, that means crafting the measurements, the SLAs, the metric definitions, the performance analytics, all of the nuts and bolts of how we measure things in an instance. Crafting those as you're rolling out that process allows you to collect data starting from the beginning. So what you want to avoid doing is, 18 months in, maybe we should go look at this process and see, how we can improve it, and then start collecting information at that point. Well, it's too late then. You need to wait more time to collect more information in order to build that body of information. And you wouldn't be necessarily driving the behaviors that you wanted along the way because no one knew what they were trying to work towards. So establish those early and use them to drive decisions. So whenever I'm measuring something, whenever I'm doing a report in something like ServiceNow, anything that I'm measuring has to be able to drive change with what the measurement showed me. So I'll give you an example of something that's not a good one. The number of incidents that came in a month. If that number changes, I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. So I could have gone from 6,000 to 10,000, and that could have been a good thing because now we're actually capturing, more of reality, and that was good. Or it could have been a bad thing that, our services are worse, and we are now, receiving bad changes, and that's producing lots of incidents. But the number itself I can't drive any change with that metric and that number. So things like that are interesting numbers to know, but they can't themselves drive change. So those aren't good ones to drive the desired behavior. So craft those measurements that work towards the ability to make decisions based off that information. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Earl.
Thank you, Andrew. Development is so fun for me because that was my background, and that's what I try to represent the developers out there now. So these few slides are a little bit more about the development side of things and the administration side of things, but I know from rising from sysadmin to a junior dev to developer to senior developer, there's a lot of pain points that can happen if you don't have certain processes established early within your development pipeline. And so some of the things that you want to think about, we're going to be talking about now. Documentation is every developer will joke about documentation in some way, but it's very, very important to maintain documentation for the sole purpose of understanding past decisions. And for that to be a reality, for you to be able to look at documentation and understand past decisions, you have to do two things. One, be consistent about your documentation. And then two, build your documentation process into all your other processes. And so what that looks like is whenever you create a new feature or you fix a bug or you do anything related to your instance that is changing in a way, you're not simply pushing those changes to production to live, that you're also required to document what you did, why you did it and when you did it and what you actually did, and putting that somewhere in a knowledge base or in a release note, somewhere that people can refer to know what was the decisions being made for that. And that usually blends into what your actual development process is, whether that be agile or some other process. But having somewhere that shows the story of why you made a change or you made a development decision is very important, and to be consistent about doing that across the board. And so you want to build that into your processes so that your developers know that they need to do those things as they're making things. One of the things that another practice that we see a lot of people run into when they are launching ServiceNow for the first time is that we recommend that you use the actual development pipeline that you will be using post-launch for your launch. And so some of these words, if you don't, you might be running into this soon if you're just starting up your ServiceNow instance. But to explain a little bit, oftentimes we'll see developers and new instance owners, they'll try to build everything in production and then clone downward into their sub-production instances and when they're ready to launch. Because it's like, oh, let's just build in live and then nobody's using it, right? So then we can just clone it downwards and when we go live. But that doesn't reflect how your actual processes are going to be. And the moment you launch, you're going to be wanting to be practiced in how you really release during your actual development pipeline. And so we recommend that you build in your sub-production instances even before launch and promote them to production instances so you can get used to that development pipeline. And so you can iron out all the processes that you might have not thought of during development so that you can be ready for post-live.
And I just put something in the chat too, Earl, sorry to jump in, but you were saying how important documentation is. And in my experience, nobody really wants to write it, but everybody wants it.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to put it. And one of the things that helps too, it's kind of documentation, but also just another step within your pipeline. We really recommend that you have code reviews for your development pipeline. It really helps for two things. One, just to make sure you're catching anything that might be incorrect or have bugs. But code reviews are really good because it helps with make sure that people are being consistent with following that development pipeline, making sure that people have proper documentation. I mentioned earlier, like it's all about consistency. So whatever method you want to do for documentation, pick one and just have everybody be consistent about it. Whether that be for developers, good inline code documentation versus like a knowledge-based documentation, whichever method that you think is best for your instance, just be consistent with it so that all of your code reviews and all of your processes, everybody knows what everyone's doing.
Which is part of good governance strategy.
Yes.
The G word again.
And I'll kick it over to Andrew to talk more about development.
So more development. This is an exciting topic. So ServiceNow is a development platform. So you can, all of the products that we ship for the most part could be roughly replicated by customers building it themselves. So we use ServiceNow internally to build on ServiceNow. And so when someone asks me, should I build this versus buy it? and you have the opportunity space like you do in ServiceNow to build things. And you look at my history and you go, well, he's a computer science person. He's been a developer. He's going to lean towards build it, isn't he? And I'm not, because, you have to make decisions in the best interests of your organization, for how much a thing is going to cost you. So you need to do that value proposition. And so the rule of thumb that I give my customers when they ask me this question, because this is actually a thing that I work with customers on consistently, is, should I build it versus buy it? And the rule of thumb I use is look to see what's available already in ServiceNow or in other systems. Like, this is a general rule of thumb, is look to see what's available and how it will fit into your organization. If it's 80% match or better, buy it, assuming, that it's not an outrageous cost, that it fits within the parameters of reasonable. Buy it is a better decision then, because you're going to be able to focus your developers, because we never have enough developers. We have never enough development time, on more high value opportunities, because there already is something that's roughly what you need. So you buy it in that scenario. Conversely, if you do that evaluation and you see that you're 60% or less alignment with something that you could buy, build it. So that's a ripe opportunity space for you to craft and start that roughly from scratch application to service that need, because it really isn't close enough to anything that you can purchase off the shelf out there. Where it gets a little fuzzy is in between that 60 to 80% line. And that'll depend on, which parts aren't aligned. And you need to evaluate how long it will take to do that. And most importantly, when you're in that fuzzy space, is talking to the, that vendor about the direction that they're going. And does that align with the direction that you see your needs going in the future? Because if they're moving closer towards you, and you were at 70%, but over the next year, you're going to be at 80%, that becomes an easier decision to say, oh, well, I'm going to buy it then. But that's not necessarily going to be the case. They could be moving in another direction than you're trying to go. And learning that up front will help you make that decision. Oh, well, we're going to be moving towards 60% or less alignment over time. And that means I'll have to add more custom development on top of this over time. And that now makes it that we should just go ahead and build this ourselves. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Britta.
Thanks, Andrew. And of course, my topic is pretty closely related to that. It's almost like we planned this. First and foremost, about the configuration versus customization question. It's always been a hot topic ever since I've been with ServiceNow. The first thing that I'd recommend is go to our YouTube channel and check out the recorded session that I did with Chuck Tomasi last month. We had a really great session where he covered this in depth, and you'll find some really great guidance and thoughts around this topic there. Secondly, if you were hoping that I was going to give you a link to a list to show you what's a customization versus what's a configuration, you're going to be really disappointed with what I have to say. Or maybe you'll be relieved. It depends. Because what this topic really breaks down to is how much tech debt do you want to carry in your organization, right? Because customizations are going to happen. And we actually encourage it, with custom apps, right? We're giving customers the opportunity to build their own apps. But when you do that, there's a responsibility that comes with it, right? And it gets back to the D word, the documentation, which we talked about earlier. Everybody wants it. Nobody wants to do it. Also goes back to the G word, governance. You got to have a reason. You don't just do customization for the sake of doing customization. And, I know there's probably some developers on the line and they love our product. They have a lot of fun with it, but you can get carried away. And you want to make sure that whatever customizations you're doing, you are well documented and you have a business reason for it. And you document that business reason because 3 years from now, somebody may be saying, that development team, they're a bunch of crocs. Why did they do this? But if you have the business justification, you'll know the context for why they did it and, what's changed in the environment since this was implemented and how do you need to adapt for that? And what's your path forward to, how this customization continues to work in the environment, or has it been superseded by a product that we now offer out of the box? Because a lot of times in the early days, before we had, say, customer service management, our customers would go build that or field service management. Well, now they don't have to. But, there were business justifications for doing these things at the time, and you need to be aware of that and keep that available. And most importantly is you own it. And I say that in all caps, you own it. If you have a partner come in and do your configuration, set up your ServiceNow for you, you still own it, because when that partner leaves, you have to, you have the care and feeding of your instance, and you need to know what's in there, why they did it, how it was done, etc. Or, upgrade time comes around and it's going to be a disaster. Everybody's going to be wondering, well, what is this? What is this breaking? Why are we getting this exception here? You have to own it. And I can't emphasize that enough. So again, just a plug to, one other thing I wanted to say, we have changed our guidance on customization. So when I was out in the field still, we would recommend to customers, copy the out of the box code, deactivate the out of box code and do your customizations in the copy. We have since reversed on that. We want you to make the change in the code and document the change, because then when you are checking code at upgrade time, you're actually seeing if your code is compatible or not with the next upgrade. And Chuck covers that in a lot more depth in the webinar. So I do point you back to the webinar for some, deeper dive on this topic, because it's not black and white. And I only have 3 to 4 minutes to talk about it right here. So I'm going to hand it back to Earl, who's going to take us to a recap.
So again, like I said earlier, we were going to cover a lot of topics, and we covered basically 10 broad topics and try to drill into them as much as we could within a few minutes each of them. But for those of you that want a recap screen, I like to provide these at the end just so you can screenshot it, take it home with you, talk to it with your teams. It's a lot of stuff and it's a lot of different topics. But like I said, the topic of we don't know what we don't know is difficult, because the moment we open Pandora's box, then you realize there's dozens of new conversations that you have to have with your team. But that's all good things, because if you're having that conversation now, you're going to be saving many headaches later down the line. You're going to save a lot of time from what do you do when you migrate a system for the first time? What do you do with data? How do you handle your new processes? Customizations versus configurations. How do you follow ITIL and out-of-box processes? How do you set up metrics for behavior? How do you create new standards for your team? How do you follow past standards? What does it look like to communicate within your team, within outside of your team, to your end users, to everybody using your instance, to governance, to all these different things? There's so many things that we could talk about. And we just wanted to provide these little breadcrumbs for you all so that you can go down the line and start exploring, oh, we didn't even think about this. And we didn't think about setting up this process. We didn't think about what it would look like to set up governance. Hey, there are people across our governance that might be good fits for helping be citizen developers. A lot of topics that you might have not even thought about until you heard someone say it. And that's kind of the beauty of having a large ServiceNow community, is that the more you invest in hearing what other people are doing and watching webinars like this, the more you'll know and the more you will not be caught off guard. So here's the recap. And Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, and the thing we were chatting a little bit right before this session and mentioned that these topics are the same ones that have come up for new customers for more than 10 years. So the topic categories haven't changed that much. So there's lots of resources out there for these. But as Earl said, we just wanted to let you know that these are the kinds of topics that you should explore when you're going through these new implementations.
100%. Because a lot of these topics came from my experience of being in the field, and I've been out of the field for 4 years now. So next up, we've got a poll question for you around what are the topics you'd like us to see a deeper dive in the future. I see everybody's jumping in there right away. That's awesome. We want to make sure that we're trying to get these topics to fit your needs.
It's pretty evenly spread.
It is. I like the comment from Peg in the chat, hindsight is gold. Oh, so true.
And I just want to mention that we did put in the community post for this, and we'll be answering any of the questions that we didn't get to. I put it in the chat, but some of the questions require a little more time, especially the ones that we're asking for resources that we don't have, handy. That we'll get those answered there.
And I'm sorry we got unanswered questions here. We'll take those, and I post a blog after the end of every session to put the answers into any of the unanswered questions. Really appreciate everybody's attendance and participation today. We've enjoyed having you, and hope this was really helpful to you. And come back to some of our additional webinars. And thanks for coming again, and have a great rest of your day.